dMRV is basically an acronym for digital measurement, reporting, and verification. And this is the use of digital tools, the data and technologies to be able to assess what is happening somewhere and to be able to report that in a transparent and reliable way.
Hello, ReFi Podcast. Today we welcome Kennedy Nana, the founder of Shamba Network, who works to integrate blockchain with real-world data to empower smallholder farmers. My takeaway personally is that maybe more than half, or perhaps 60% of a ReFi project's work should be around engaging the local communities and building alongside them rather than, just for them without really understanding their needs.
I also appreciate Kennedy's focus on capacity building and engagement of local communities, as well as his take on the state of digital monitoring, reporting, and verification, also known as dMRV, and its impact in Africa. So let us know what you think in the comments below, and let's dive into the episode. Hi, Kennedy. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me here.
It's great to have you here, Kennedy. So Kennedy is the CEO of Shamba Network, where he integrates blockchain and satellite data to empower smallholder farmers in Africa. Kennedy, we are really excited to have you on the show and to welcome you to our Impact Mini-series.
Thank you, Teresa. It's exciting to be here, and I look forward to the conversation.
Yeah, likewise. And I would love to start with your personal journey. Can you walk us through your journey into Web3 and what inspired you to work in the climate resilience field?
Sure. So I think my journey into Web3 starts circa 2017. I think I was one of those people who got interested in the space as we were having that 2017 bull run. I had heard of crypto before. I think I first got wind of Bitcoin prior to 2017, but it is in 2017 when I really got interested. And like many people in this part of the world, I got into Web3 essentially through crypto, I would say. So I was interested in crypto. There were certain opportunities opening up in crypto, such as arbitrage trading, using peer-to-peer mechanisms. That is very popular in this part of the world. So that's how I started getting into crypto. And the more I got into it, the more I started learning about the ethos. I started learning about the importance of decentralized money. I started learning about all of these great things. And then somewhere during that journey, I started also learning about smart contracts. And this is where it really blew up for me, because all of a sudden I was able to see the bigger picture, the bigger opportunity, that this is not just about crypto and the money part, but this technology can be used for so much more. And so I actually started out with learning how to be a smart contract developer, learning things such as Solidity, learning how to use all of those tools. And along that journey, I started now learning about the various things that could happen in Web3, such as decentralized finance, and by then a very newly emerging area known as regenerative finance or ReFi. And so that is somewhere where I found my, what I would say, home, because coming from a background where I'd worked with environmental conservation, natural resources protection, and also empowering farmers, I could immediately see the value of ReFi in helping our world with some of the biggest challenges it has right now. And so around 2018, 2019, I was playing around with that concept. And around 2020 is when now I started working on it. And in 2021, Shamba Network was founded.
Awesome. And how would you perhaps describe Shamba Network and its objectives to someone even that's new to blockchain?
Yes. So I would say that the Shamba Network is basically a Web3 project that aims to provide ecological and climate data on-chain. When I got into the space, I saw that there were very many nice projects that are targeted towards impact, but that element of how to be able to measure impact, how to be able to assess it and quantify it and prove it, that is maybe one of the areas where I saw there was a gap. And so coming from a background in geospatial science, having worked in research and in developing data solutions, working with satellite data, machine learning, I immediately saw how we could contribute to that through Shamba. So the mission of Shamba is essentially to provide this data about the climate, about ecological systems, about impact, and make it available to drive various applications. There are quite a number of applications that can be driven. We are looking at applications that touch on impact, things like climate action, but we're also looking at the potential to provide data to drive solutions such as climate resilience, which in this age of climate change is a very big deal.
Absolutely. And climate data on chain is obviously a new field. So I wonder, were there any kind of big challenges that you faced in the early days of Shamba, kind of pushing mission?
Yes, I would say there are several technical and non-technical challenges that we faced. As you say, of course, climate data on chain is something that is still, I would say even right now, it is still in its early stages. And I would think that one of the biggest challenges that we faced when we were getting into this space is how to accommodate huge chunks of data on chain. Because by the very nature of blockchains, they're not designed to accommodate big data sets in their raw format, such as satellite data and everything else. So what that drove us to was to work on a solution that taps into what might be regarded as an oracle. So Shamba Network was the first to build this kind of ecological data oracle. And what an ecological data oracle does is that it helps us get this information that is encoded in big chunks of data, such as satellite data, to be able to get that in a synthesized form and put it on chain for applications that need such data or the insights from such data. And so one of the things that we innovated was this way in which we can be able to tie the off-chain world to the on-chain world and make it possible for applications that are running on blockchain to actually ask such questions such as what is happening in a particular part of the earth with a particular ecological parameter, and that question can be answered by connecting to the servers of NASA, European Space Agency, and others, pulling in the required datasets, analyzing them internally with algorithms, and being able to then transfer that data on-chain to the applications. So there were certain technical challenges involved in being able to figure out exactly how much data should we on-chain and in what format. Does it make sense, for instance, to upload a 5 GB dataset that encodes data in binary format just so that we can have it in its natural form? Or do we need mechanisms along the way that actually on-chain the synthesized information instead, and in a way that is actually reliable and trustworthy and can be tracked? So we worked a lot on this, and we were able to provide this oracle. And so far, it has actually driven some real-world applications, which I'm happy to share about as we go along.
Absolutely. Congratulations on that. We're going to jump into those in just a second. But while we're at the data side of things, I'm curious, what's your take on the general state of dMRV, or digital measuring, report, and verification? What's your take on that industry in general? And more specifically, what role does it play in the Shamba Network efforts?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I always like beginning by just kind of explaining what that acronym is, maybe for those who've not heard it before. So dMRV is basically an acronym for digital measurement, reporting, and verification. And this is the use of digital tools and data and technologies to be able to assess what is happening somewhere and to be able to report that in a transparent and reliable way. So one of the things I always like to point out is that dMRV is not just one kind of thing. There are various flavors of dMRV, right? Because when we talk, for instance, about climate action or climate projects, these come in a wide variety of flavors as well. You have projects that touch on energy, maybe things like adoption of solar. You have projects that touch on nature-based solutions, such as planting trees or mangroves. You also have other solutions as well, such as biochar and various others. So, and of course, as we are now moving forward, we are seeing other credits come up. For instance, we are seeing biodiversity credits coming up. Those also require their own form of measurement and verification. We are seeing water credits. We are also seeing various types of credits. I think Regeneration Network is among the projects that is really pioneering a lot of great kind of credits out there, ecological credits. That is what we call the family. And I think ecological credits being this thing, it is not homogeneous. There are various things within it. In that same case, we also have various types of dMRV. For instance, the way a farmer who is doing an agroforestry project needs to assess his impact or to be able to monitor it is very different from a farmer who is doing a project that is building soil organic carbon, and they want to be able to measure that and report that. So even within nature-based solutions, even within what projects a single stakeholder such as a farmer can do, you still have various types of projects within it, and so the various types of dMRV. So one of the things that we realized very early on going into this space is that there is a need for focus. There's a need for identifying a niche, so to speak, where we feel we can have a lot of impact and where we feel that it will impact the most number of people. And also based on where we are in this part of the world, in the global south, there is a need for us to identify which area we want to go into. And so we decided to focus on dMRV that actually empowers these land stewards, especially the smallholder farmers. Why? Because most of the farming in the global south is actually handled by these farmers, and they're the ones who contribute mainly to the food security. So working with farmers, one of the decisions that also drives that is when you're looking at the core benefits of projects. So that also determines where you want to go. So for us, working with farmers was the area we chose, and their dMRV needs are what we now decided to build and cater to. So in this space, we have been working on how we can be able to use satellite data, especially, that is the backbone of what we do, but also emerging technologies such as artificial intelligence and other sources of data understanding to be able to process this satellite data and to be able to quantify changes in the landscape based on methodologies such as agroforestry. So when a community somewhere comes together and they decide that they want to maybe reforest a part of their community land that had been deforested over a certain period, when they start planting those trees, we can be able to take images that are able to show us how the situation was at the start, which is the baseline. Then we are able to take measurements several times over the duration of that project, perhaps on an annual basis. And at the end of it, you are then able to also determine what the end line looks like. And so we are able to show that difference between how the situation was at the beginning, how the situation is at the end. We are able to quantify over what area these trees have been planted. We're able to even give estimates of approximately how much carbon has been removed through this exercise. And so that allows these small projects to be able to become viable, so to speak, because they might not be able to bring in a lot of this traditional MRV expertise, which is more suited for large projects. But with dMRV, they are able to still quantify and take stock of the impact they have generated. So that is the specific area where Shamba Network works.
Love it. And I'm very excited to explore this a little more because I feel like you're capturing some very important knowledge when it comes to real world impact. Maybe to set up the context a little more, can you share a bit about the traditional pain points of these farmers, like what they're struggling with, and maybe also what's their access to technology?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, considering that we are talking about farmers who typically don't also have a lot of access to things like technology to begin with. So talking about the traditional pain points that have previously prevented a lot of such communities from getting involved, I think the most obvious one is the cost barrier. When we are talking about getting involved in climate action or like projects that have an impact on the world, and people are maybe trying to monetize that and to be able to make it sustainable by getting into these new markets like the carbon markets, traditionally there have been this kind of like gatekeepers, and I would say that there are certain barriers that have been there traditionally. One of them being that the price of being able to engage experts to come and do the monitoring, the reporting, the verification has typically tended to be high. And the reason for this is because, of course, I think when the carbon markets were starting, a lot of these projects were focused around big areas such as forest and whatnot. So the idea of working in small areas had not always been native to the space. And so even the expertise that filled in to make the whole industry viable was initially tailored to these big projects that cover big places. And so their budgets typically as experts has been high as well. So when it comes to these experts being engaged by the small communities, it makes the projects a non-starter from the start because they become non-viable economically. You cannot engage an expert to come in and maybe evaluate a project and perform validation and verification if the cost of getting that expert outweighs whatever value will be generated by the credits that are created in the process. So this has been traditionally the biggest pain point. And I think in some ways it is still there, because when we look at the state of dMRV right now, we are not at a place where any of the big registries or maybe even the smaller registries are typically already using dMRV in a big way. We are still having a lot of the verification being done by the traditional verification bodies. They are known as the conformity assessment bodies. So those are the guys who are doing all of the validation and verification currently. So we still have that kind of barrier that prevents these small communities from coming in. It is a financial barrier, but it is born of a technical need, the need for data. And this is what dMRV is trying to fill in that space. So that has been one of the biggest challenges. The cost, I would say also another big barrier when we are talking about these communities and their participation in maybe the climate space is finances. Because typically when we are talking of a lot of these climate action projects, even if it is planting trees, there is a certain expense that goes into all of that. For instance, in Kenya, a tree seedling would cost about, especially the ones that we use, they're about $2.50 to $3. Yeah. So for a tree seedling. But when you're approaching like small scale farmers who make less than $5 a day and you're telling them to plant 30 trees at $3 each, and you're not providing anything, it becomes a very difficult sell. So yeah, thinking about how if we want communities to be able to participate more, we really need to figure out how climate projects can be financed. These communities can do a lot. They can do biochar. They can do so many things apart from just planting trees and maybe doing ecological agriculture. But each and every one of those activities, including even shifting from traditional ag to ecological ag, each of them has a cost. And we really need to figure out how those finances will be taken care of to make the whole thing sustainable. So I would say those are the two biggest ones. I would say another one is probably on the knowledge side. Of course, there's a big knowledge gap that needs to be filled. When we talk of some of these projects and about climate action or about carbon credits, a lot of this is still new to a lot of these communities. So being able to figure out how to plug that knowledge gap, and as we are doing capacity building, to also do awareness building so that more people are in tune with the big goals and what the mission is towards climate action. I would say those are some of the top challenges that we've seen out there and that we have faced and we are working on with the communities we work with.
Yeah, thanks for sharing your personal story with working with communities on the ground. And I'm curious to move a little bit into institutional collaboration side, right? When you work with communities on the ground, but you also partner with some institutional organizations. And I'm curious about your take on your recent collaboration with Mercy Corp Ventures. Can you tell us more about the pilot project you did with them and perhaps explain what does it mean for the Shamba Network?
Yeah, sure. Happy to. So on the first question of working with the institutions, yes, we have a lot of institutional partners actually across those chains that we work. For instance, in the carbon market, we have partners on both the demand side and the supply side. On the demand side, we are working with the farmers, yes, but we're also working with grassroots organizations that work with these farmers. And these are big institutions. They've been working with them for a while. So we have our own way in which we work with them. On the demand side, we work with guys who have the carbon marketplaces and other things so that we can be able to help these communities get their credits to market easier. So we work with various institutional partners across the whole chain. And that is on the climate action side, what we are doing to be able to fight climate change, providing dMRV to that. And as I mentioned earlier, this data that we're also providing is also useful for climate resilience, aside from the mitigation. So when we talk about adaptation, when we talk about helping communities that are being ravaged by climate change, build resilience, be able to better adapt and survive, this is something that data also plays a big role in. So one of the things that we've done is we've also tested how data can play a role in that. We were part of this pilot that had participation from Mercy Corp Ventures together with Diva Protocol and Fortune Credit, which is a local microfinance institution in Kenya. And the goal of the pilot was to provide what is known as anticipatory cash transfers to herders, pastoralists who are impacted or threatened by drought. The whole idea being, rather than, okay, maybe I should start by explaining who pastoralists are. Pastoralists are people whose lifestyle is to move around with their herd of cattle looking for pasture, and they typically move to areas where there's grass, and then when that grass maybe like is ending, they will move somewhere else. So they move around with their cattle. And it is a very sustainable practice in areas of the world which are semi-arid, and it isn't possible for them to stay with their herds in one place for an extended period. But now when something like drought happens, there's no place for them to move to, because even there the grass has ended. So what we were doing there is using satellite data to be able to take images of that whole area and to determine how much vegetation there was in the landscape, which then acts as a proxy of the forage that is available to these livestock. So that we can be able to measure that vegetable index. It's known as the normalized difference vegetative index. That is what we were calculating from the satellite data. And using that, we are able to trace how vegetation is depleting in the landscape, especially as the drought conditions kick in. And so as we see that point coming where we are hitting a threshold where it now indicates drought might be imminent, funds can be released proactively to these pastoralists, which enables them to be able to buy feed preemptively. And it might not be able to save all of the livestock, but at least they'll be able to save a portion of that livestock, which then enables them to transit through the difficult drought period. And eventually when the rains come, they have enough of a starter herd to be able to replenish their stocks. At least that's the whole idea. So the whole idea being that you don't wait for people to be highly impacted by a particular risk, but rather you can be able to release cash to them in an anticipatory format, which then allows them to mount a preemptive defense and to be able to avoid the worst effects of that drought. So we did that pilot. It was known as the Diva Donate, because the whole amount that was going to these farmers, to these pastoralists, was actually coming from donations through a Web3 protocol that our partners, Diva Protocol, have developed. And Shamba was providing the data so that the Diva Protocol smart contracts could be able to trigger out payment once that threshold has been detected, and also to be able to determine the impact so that a certain amount of funds is released depending on how big the impact is to these people. So it was a very successful project. We learned a lot during that collaboration, and I think it sets the tune for similar and maybe bigger programs that will happen in the future around climate resilience that are based on the same model.
Very powerful. Thank you for sharing that. I wonder, can you also tell us a little bit about the results of the pilot, and also talk about the tech stack a little bit? For example, how was the financial distribution handled? Was it through Web3 wallets?
Oh, yes. So I believe the pilot reached about 300 and something people, 350, I believe. Those were the pastoralists who were able to get covered during that period. And they did get some payout that actually enabled them to be able to mitigate some of the challenges that they were facing due to the climatic conditions. And the thing is, the payment did not necessarily go to their Web3 wallets, because despite the fact that a Web3 protocol is involved in this, we also are dealing with the fact that a lot of these pastoralists are not that tech savvy and don't really have so much access even to technology itself. As I mentioned, a lot of these communities are communities that move around, so they might even be in an area which has no network coverage, no 3G, no 2G, nothing. So we were not able to use Web3 wallets as the final mile delivery for the value, but rather the crypto that was being moved around by the smart contracts was actually being off-ramped into a local digital payment solution here in Kenya. It's known as M-Pesa, which is basically mobile money. It is used quite widely across Kenya, I believe by more than 4 million people. And it just made sense for us to off-ramp from Web3, which a lot of these pastoralists are not familiar with, to that M-Pesa format, which then is available for them. I believe one of the benefits of this is that with a local digital payment solution that doesn't really require any internet access, even when these people are off-grid, they are still able to access their funds and they are able to withdraw them at the nearest agent. So I think there always has to be that consideration when we're thinking of Web3 solutions that can be implemented, especially in places like the Global South. It's important to take stock of some of the reality, especially with access to technology and also digital literacy, and find a good point where systems that are more familiar with the population can be interfaced with more advanced, newer solutions.
Yeah, I think this cannot be highlighted enough, making sure that we are meeting communities where they are. But I also wonder, how do you make sure generally that these local communities are like really engaged and benefit from the projects, not only in the short term, but also in the long term? And do you have any kind of engagement strategies, like always be in touch with them and provide long-term support?
Okay, so like maybe specifically with regards to what we are doing with the climate resilience side, I do believe the partners we are working with there have a lot of engagement with the local communities. But also just to speak to the communities that we normally interact with the most, which are the farmers, the ones who we work with on these climate action projects. There's a lot of engagement that goes on. One of our goals is to be able to support these farmers to also build that digital literacy and to be able to be more comfortable with these tools that we use. Because the whole idea is to be able to have a pathway of onboarding these communities to solutions such as Web3 technologies. And you don't just wake up one day and give them the final thing. You have to take them slowly in steps until they get onboarded. So we are doing a lot of awareness building. That is one of the big things that we work on at Shamba, engaging with these communities, making sure that they are on board with the whole mission of the climate action, letting them know what the big picture is and getting them to really buy into that and to believe in their power to make it happen, to believe in their power to drive regeneration in their communities, but then also educating them about the opportunities that are available to them to be able to make this sustainable. So educating them about the carbon markets, how they work, who the participants are, what their role is, what MRV is, and all of that stuff. I think for us doing that awareness building, it's actually a very big part of what we do with the communities. Almost 60 to 70% of our engagement with the communities is around this awareness and capacity building. Getting them to open accounts on the different applications we've built for them, showing them how to access this over their phones, or maybe through some of their family members for those who are not familiar with using smartphones. So there's a lot of awareness and capacity building that goes into making sure communities are empowered to be able to do this whole thing sustainably into the future. And so it's not just a matter of building technology and taking it to them. You also really must invest in this whole process of understanding the community, understanding their needs, and being able to bring these solutions in a way that fits their needs.
Absolutely. And I feel like there's still a little gap in that sense in the ReFi space, really determining whether a project's going to make it or not. So what do you see as some of the biggest mistakes that you've seen maybe ReFi projects make when it comes to engaging with local communities?
I would say that not ReFi projects necessarily, but I've seen a lot of regeneration projects that maybe we've been able to learn from. As we were coming into this space as Shamba Network, we are not necessarily the first guys to do like carbon credits in Kenya. Other projects have done that before. But we've also seen a situation where some of those projects were not very transparent with the communities they dealt with, or maybe they did not share enough information for these communities to understand what was happening. And so there was a level of mistrust that had crept in. And so I think communication is really important in projects that are dealing with communities, because unlike projects that are maybe dealing with a big entity such as a government, maybe you're working on a project that is on a forest that is regulated and you're dealing with few people. When you're dealing with a community that has maybe 100, 300 people, communication is very important. It's important for everybody to be able to understand what is happening, to be able to understand what their role is, to be able to understand how the measurement happens, and even when rewards come, to be able to understand what their portion is and why they've got that portion, maybe in comparison to other people within the community. Otherwise, if you don't share enough information, that leaves space for people to start coming up with their own theories and assumptions, and that always leads to issues. So I'd say engagement with communities is a big thing. In my experience in Kenya, and especially with the ReFi communities that I've seen here, I would say that the engagement has been great. A lot of the communities that are working here are very good at engaging people, at being able to build that relationship with the communities. So I don't think I really have seen a lot of challenges specifically with ReFi folks. Within the bigger regenerative space, definitely, but I think the people in ReFi have been able to get it right, most of it.
I'm glad to hear that the engagement levels are so high in the ReFi space in Kenya. But I'm curious, throughout these efforts of onboarding these communities to these new technologies, have you encountered any skeptics and or critiques of the Web3 as a potential solution to some of the challenges that your communities are facing? And if so, how do you usually address those criticisms?
Yes, I'd say that criticisms of Web3 are something you've definitely encountered. You remember I mentioned earlier that we work with institutional partners on both the demand and supply side. So especially for some of the partners that we work with, being able to sell to them the merits of Web3 took a while. I think crypto generally has a bad rep depending on who you talk to. But here in Africa, I think a lot of people have been scammed under the guise of crypto. And the sad part is that it wasn't even really crypto. It was just scammers using crypto and whatnot, because at that time that was a hype word. But it made a lot of people quite hesitant to engage themselves with projects that profess to involve crypto in one way or another. So when you start thinking of maybe getting people to maybe receive payment to receive their dues or their income from maybe these carbon markets in form of crypto or in some other decentralized currency, you get pushback on some of those things. When you tell them that you're going to be using some technology like blockchain that they associate with crypto, you have to take time to explain to them other things beyond crypto that the tech is good for. So this is something that we've definitely seen, but at least I can say we've been able to, through that transparent knowledge sharing and even holding a lot of events and forums, we've been able to dispel some of those fears from a lot of the parties we are working with. I'd say it's not just with the communities that we work with, even with investors. I think this is something I've seen for ReFi projects that are doing a lot of regenerative work and maybe they approach climate investors. The minute you start mentioning that you're also doing something in Web3 and there's a token and something involved, of course, a lot of people start getting cold feet. So I think there's still a way to go. I think the important thing is working with people who at least have an idea of what Web3 is and they're already open to it. But there's still a way to go before we're able to onboard people across the whole landscape, whether it's investors or community, onto the whole Web3 platform.
Totally. And I'm glad to hear that some of those forums and events that you've been hosting helped provide a different narrative. And speaking of like Web3 in general, I'm curious, in your view, what do you see as the most impactful applications of Web3 for Africa at the moment?
Yes, I think definitely ReFi is one of those big ones because a lot of Africa's economy is based on nature and the ecosystem services from nature. So I believe with the kind of natural resources we have here and the need to take care of them and protect them, ReFi has a really big role to play there. I think another thing that will be very big for the African continent with regards to Web3 technology is climate adaptation. This being one of those places in the world that is very heavily hit by the impact of climate change and a lot of people are vulnerable. I think some of the solutions that we are working on with regards to climate resilience have a very big role to play in Africa. For instance, just to give you some numbers, climate insurance is up to 40% cheaper when it's done on Web3 compared to when it's done traditionally. So I think that in itself really means that more people can be able to access some of these financial services such as insurance if we are able to implement them in better rails such as Web3. Aside from that, I think there are other areas that will really be big. I've seen real world assets is one of those areas that is really blowing up. As I mentioned, Africa has a lot of natural resources. And when we think of the fact that people are not able to access the financial system very easily in this part of the world, tokenization and RWA tokenization at that, I think it has a very big opportunity to drive a lot of projects in this part of the world. Another one is DeFi. Right now, it's still at an early stage, but I think that also has opportunities of unlocking finance for some of the people and communities that have traditionally been kept out of the mainstream financial system. So DeFi in itself, I think, we are starting to see the rise of certain applications that are targeted at people in this part of the world. And although a lot of these spaces that I'm talking about are still in their infancy, I think there's a lot of room for them to grow over the next couple of years.
Do you perhaps have a favorite project that you want to shout out?
Of course, beyond Shamba, which I would chill every day. But yeah, I think there are also quite a number of nice projects that are happening in Africa and especially in Kenya. They may not be very big, but I see a lot of potential with them. I think Aquapad, that is based out of Mombasa, that is doing a lot of beach cleanups. I think those guys are doing a wonderful job. And I think there are quite a number of other projects. I won't go into naming all of them here because most of them are small and maybe people might not be that familiar. But yeah, I see a lot of great projects that are starting out and will be really big over the next couple of years.
Awesome. And in terms of ReFi specific projects, right, you said that's a really big Web3 area in your region. How do you see this community evolve in the future? And perhaps what's the current landscape of ReFi projects is like? And do you have any critique or maybe advice for how it should evolve in the future?
Yes, maybe just to start with that question of how the landscape is, there are actually quite a number of ReFi projects in Kenya. I know projects that are working in the central part of Kenya on maybe nature-based solutions to do with tree planting. I know some that are doing stuff with agroecology, but I also know projects that are based in other parts of the country, such as in the coastal areas, working on mangroves. There are others that are doing plastic cleanups and whatnot. So that is also something different. So basically, we are seeing ReFi projects across various parts of the spectrum. I even know a project that is actually working on languages and helping to share and capture the beauty of local languages, and especially Swahili. So you are having projects that are regenerating the environment, regenerating the coastal areas, regenerating even cultural heritage such as languages. And I love it. I think the things are going very well. The good thing is that we have a very good community here in Kenya with regards to ReFi. All of these projects are talking to each other. They are seeking ways to collaborate. They are working together. And I think that just builds a lot of momentum. And it's not just in Kenya, because even when I look to the neighboring countries, like in Tanzania, Uganda, and all the other places, there are quite a number of ReFi projects on the ground that are happening, and that people are doing some great stuff. I would say that one of the important things that I see is required for this space to continue growing is to have more engagement and more forums, because the only way these projects can grow is by onboarding other people who are locals into the whole Web3 ReFi space. And that can only happen if they engage with these people. So for us, holding events and festivals like the ReFi Kenya Festival, which is now in its third year, and being able to get a bunch of stakeholders from government people to community leaders to land stewards to everybody to come together and talk, and then sharing with them during those conversations about ReFi, about Web3, about the kind of tools and culture that they can be able to be part of. I think this is really important in helping this space grow. As for what I see over the next couple of years, I see a lot of these projects actually getting to a point where now they become actually quite impactful, and they also start generating revenues and attracting good funding. I think one of the things to keep in mind with ReFi is that unlike other spaces such as DeFi, ReFi can take a while before you start getting that ROI, because a lot of the projects themselves by their very nature take time when you're doing regeneration. So yeah, I expect that over the next couple of years, we'll see a lot of these projects that are kind of in their formal stages right now, getting to a point where they're mature enough and being able to generate revenues that will now actually bring in proper investors, and then we can be able to see that space really scale up.
Beautiful. And I know you also talked to us about Eve Safari in the beginning. So maybe any of our listeners that are going to be there can come say hi to you.
Yes, I think I will be around there. Definitely, I love attending that event. And also for any people who might be around when we'll be holding ReFi Kenya, I think that would be a great festival to also attend, just to get to even understand the landscape and see the various projects that are happening in Kenya and hear from the founders and the people working on them. It's also a great way of being able to meet land stewards who are doing a lot of work on the ground, and to be able to understand really where this movement is headed over the next couple of years. So also for any of your listeners who will be around in Q4, especially in the month of November or December, I think they would really enjoy and learn a lot from attending ReFi Kenya 2020.
Perfect. Thank you for sharing that. Kennedy, we are coming towards the end of our time, but I wonder, even like on a personal level, what has been some of the most rewarding success that you've seen with Shamba Network? What are you like most proud of?
Okay, I think there are quite a number of things I'm proud of. One of them, of course, is this element of community engagement. When we started out, especially engaging the communities here, telling them about climate action, impact measurement and verification, carbon markets, we were basically speaking Greek to a lot of them. They did not understand and they were not really receptive. But over time, we've really seen that change, and it's been amazing to see people get to a point where these concepts that were very foreign and alien to them, and maybe they were not comfortable with initially, they thought they were being scammed or whatnot, they are now starting to become more mainstream and accepted. I think also we were lucky that government policy around things like the carbon markets has been to really encourage them. So that has helped the people also to be able to trust some of these schemes. But yeah, I would say that element of being able to reach people. And right now at Shamba, we have over 10,000 farmers who are engaged in our projects. And to be able to do that, I think has taken a lot of awareness building, trust building, and all of that is driven by the knowledge that we're able to share with these communities. So that has been one of the biggest things. I'd say I'm also quite happy about the fact that we've been able to demonstrate real world usage of some of these technologies that we've built. When we talk about ecological and climate data oracles in the Web3 space, there really isn't a lot of examples of that being used in an impactful way in the world. I think a lot of oracles that we've seen in the Web3 space so far have been price oracles. Those have a lot of use because of DeFi, but ecological data oracles and climate data oracles, these are still in the formative stages. So having done projects now that have provided communities with actual climate cover against risk, insurance cover against climate risks, I think this is actually a big thing. And it really sets us up to be able to explore the future with regards to other projects that we are working on that we believe can really empower these communities. So those are just some of the two big ones. But yeah, I think there's a lot that we've been able to achieve over the past 2 or 3 years that we are proud of. And there's even much more that we are looking forward to accomplishing as we move forward.
Wow. Yeah, definitely a lot to be proud of. And thanks for sharing some of those success stories with us. And as we come to the end of the episode, we like to conclude with rapid fire questions that we ask each of our guests. You can be as brief or as detailed as you'd like. Are you ready?
Ready.
The first question is, what book are you currently reading?
Right now, I'm not actually reading any book. I've been engaged in some studying that I'm doing for transformer machine learning systems. So I'm currently not reading any book.
I want to know, and you answered this a little bit, but what excites you the most about your work?
It is seeing the impact that it can drive for communities. That is what motivates me the most, and that is what drives me to do this job every day.
Beautifully said. And the last one is, what's the one lesson, quote, a mantra that has shaped you the most as a person?
Well, that is a tricky one. I would say it is just to do it. Just do it. I think one of the biggest challenges that I've seen is people are normally afraid of taking the first step and doing something that they really dream of. And just do it is one of the things that I would advise anyone. Take the first step and everything else will eventually fall into place.
I think that's the perfect call to action for our listeners to actually take action. So Kennedy, thank you so much for joining us today. Really loved your insights into connecting the off-chain world with the on-chain world to empower communities. And we shared some really powerful lessons that I think our listeners can take into their work. So yeah, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Teresa. Thank you, Maya. It's been great. It's been a pleasure joining you. And yeah, keep up the good work with the podcast.
Thank you. And we'll make sure to add all the links to Shamba Network, to contact Kennedy. So if our listeners want to follow what's next for your project, they will be able to find it in the description of the episode. Thanks again.
Sounds great. Thanks, guys.